for teaching the visual arts, and it's called background, middle ground, and foreground. And it's for teaching those 3 areas of space that we see in an artwork that have to do with distance. It's a movement game, so it incorporates movement. It also has a visual aspect, and it has an auditory aspect too, because your students are listening to a set of instructions. But it's mostly a movement and visual game. So what we do for background, middle ground, foreground is I teach my lesson on those areas of space, background, middle ground, foreground. Then what I do is I bring them out into the hallway, I line them up against the wall, and usually I have them take a seat while I explain the game. The game is played like this. Right now, I'm in the background, because if I was the teacher over there looking at the painting, I would be furthest away, so therefore I'm in the background. If I call out background, you strike a pose up against the wall in the background. If I call out the word middle ground, I'm just slightly closer to my viewer. I come out to the middle and I strike a pose. I'm in the middle ground. Now if I'm even closer to my viewer, as close as I can get, I come up a little bit more. Now I'm in the foreground. If I call middle ground, I strike a pose in the middle ground. Foreground, strike a pose in the foreground. Background, strike a pose up against the wall. Then I have my students stand, and then we play our game. We do a couple practice rounds first, just so students kind of get a sense of themselves in space. And then afterward, we play the game for keeps. Now, if a student isn't in the right space at the right time, they're out. But that doesn't mean that they lose. They just change part in the game. So now they join the teacher, and they help to find other students that are out. So then what happens is the student who is active is still playing the game, and the student who is no longer active in the game becomes a visual learner and helps to spot other students who are out. It's actually good for students to be both out and in the game, because then they're getting the movement and the visual. Now, of course, this game comes with some rules, some additional rules, and those rules are: 1, all poses must be by yourself. You may not be touching another student while you do your pose. 2, all poses must be appropriate for school, and this includes hand gestures. 3, you may not put your hands on the ground, so all poses must be standing up, and this is to avoid people's fingers being stepped on. And of course, safety first is our primary rule. After we do this activity, we discuss how objects appear to get smaller and higher up on the page as they get further away, and how they appear to get larger and lower on the page as they get closer. And how we do that is I have my students transition from up against the wall in the hallway to across the open space of the hallway. And then I have them measure a tall student, a medium-sized student, and a less tall student. And I never pick the tallest or the shortest student in the class. I always pick students who are kind of in the middle of the road. My students measure to verify the height of these 3 students. And then I have the shortest child stay in the front, and I have the tallest child go all the way in the very back of the hallway. And I have the students measure again. Then they realize that the student who was once the shortest is all of a sudden the tallest, and the student who was once the tallest is now the shortest. And the medium-sized student also appears to shrink. They stand kind of in the middle of the hallway. Then I have the students come back, and we create hypotheses about how this might work. Then I explain to my students that it has to do with your field of view. So what happens is, when things are close up to your face and this is your field of view, your hand takes up most of that field of view, so it looks like it takes up more space. As your field of view gets bigger, objects get further away, your hand seems to take up less of that field of view, making it appear smaller. The next step of this experiment is I start backing up, and I have my students measure where my feet are. And what winds up happening is their hands get higher and higher and higher as they're measuring where those feet are. That shows students that objects not only appear to get smaller, but they appear to get higher up on the page. Then we come back to background, middle ground, foreground, and this time, when students are in the background, they get real small. Middle ground, they stand regular, and foreground, they're very large. To remember that as objects get further away, they get smaller. When they're in the middle, they're medium-sized, and when they're foreground, they get much larger. Now, unfortunately, I haven't been able to teach my students how to hover mid-air, so I haven't been able to get them to appear higher on the page or lower on the page. But I haven't found that this has created any significant misunderstandings in their artwork. I think they all understand it, and I've seen that proven in their artwork. This is a great activity for students because, again, you're getting that cerebellum to work, that movement center of your body. You're encouraging students to rehearse or take ownership of their learning by putting it to use in a situation. You're encouraging visual memory. You're encouraging episodic memory, which is the memory of place and of circumstance. And you're also activating that science, that experiment, that why is this phenomenon happening scientifically aspect for your students as well. Anytime you incorporate movement, visual experiments, when you're incorporating multiple art forms and multiple disciplines, your students are going to learn better. I hope you find this activity enjoyable. Oh, and one more thing. I almost forgot. This activity is not necessarily for students who are entirely physically able. If you have a student who has limited mobility, they can also play this game. And one thing I do for that is I have a stick. Here it is. Sometimes a big wrapping paper tube works really well. And if I have a student in a wheelchair or who has limited mobility for whatever reason, we still go out in the hallway, they are up against the background, and then they move the stick. So background, middle ground, foreground. That really helps the student be involved, and they still learn the areas of the painting. And then depending on the student's mobility, they can also go low for background, medium for middle ground, and high for foreground. So they still get the activity, they still get the movement, you're still activating the cerebrum, you're still activating the visual memory, and it incorporates and includes everybody in your classroom. So I hope you find this activity useful, visual arts teacher. I'm really excited to hear your comments and hear how you might teach space in your classroom. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.